I'm already sweating. This webisode about to be hot. I want to speak from this topic for a few moments. Are you sure you want a godly man? Because for the most part, I really don't hear brothers saying, where are all the godly women? For the most part, I hear sisters saying, where are all the godly men? And just personally, from my perspective, I firmly believe if you can't find them, you build them. This is what I'm talking about. Kings making kings. Kings aren't born, kings are built. We are born in sin and shaped in iniquity, which is why we must be born again. And please don't get it twisted. I am not talking about you marrying some brother and building him. No, I'm talking about fatherhood and motherhood. Recognizing the king in your son now are other men. Train up other men to be kingdom men. Because I'm really thinking maybe one of the problems of today is we have a whole generation asking where they are instead of asking who likes construction. Build that brother, sir. Speak that language to your son, ma'am. I'm not talking about marriage because God put Adam to sleep, opened his side, took a rib out, closed it back. He was intentional with closing it back, because if we don't allow God to close some stuff in our life as men, a woman can never be our wife. She'll only be our nurse. We'll constantly keep bleeding on her. But that's a whole nother conversation. Let's get to the content. So I was having this dialogue with some sisters and I asked them, do you really want a godly man? Like, do you really want a man who puts God first? And before you say yes, do you put God first? Like when you're in a mood, or you're feeling some type of way, or you're feeling offended, do you still represent the kingdom? Or do you allow your emotions to be a permission slip for you to no longer represent your faith? Like, I'm gonna cuss her clean out and my caption's gonna be, God ain't through with me yet. If so, the man who puts God first will probably get on your nerves. He might even come off as insensitive and not supporting, because if somebody does you wrong and he tells you to pray for them and still speak to them even if they don't speak to you, you might feel as though he's not taking your side, he's not hearing you, he's not supportive, he's not supporting how you feel. But is he supposed to? Or is he supposed to help you respond like a virtuous woman? And I can already see the side eyes coming at me through this camera. I know your trigger fingers are ready, but please hear me. Before you stone me, before you stop the video, hear me out. Are you sure you want a man who presents the godly thing to do in situations? Do you really want that spiritual accountability? And before you say yes, who is your spiritual accountability partner now? And how do you treat them? Oh, and let me add this. Do you know their flaws? And do you know their issues? And despite you knowing all the stuff about your spiritual accountability partner, do you still receive from them? Because it's easy for you to receive from a fountain that has a filter. You don't really know nothing about them. But in marriage, it's totally different. I believe one of the hardest parts about marriage is you know the absolute worst about that person, and you still can receive correction from them. You still can receive correction from them without being petty and throwing up a past scenario where they missed the mark. Marriage is for mature audiences only, and it is a ministry, and everybody's not called to it. And I think that's probably the hardest thing. You know all this brother's flaws, you know all this woman's flaws, and they can be correcting you right now, and even though they were wrong from a prior incident, and you still are mature enough to receive their correction right now, because back then they were wrong, but right now they're right. Can you be vulnerable? Because if you want a godly man, one of his assignments is to wash your spots, blemishes, and wrinkles. So this means you got to admit that you got some spots, blemishes, and wrinkles, and you have to present them to him so he can wash them. You know what else godly men do? They pray, they serve, and they forgive. How's your prayer life right now? And do you pray before you make decisions? Like, if you want to do something, how receptive would you be if he was like, you know what, let's pray about it first? And I hear you. Before you say, I would love that, do you pray on stuff now? Like, did you pray before you entered into that last relationship? And did you label that one friend a hater who kept saying, I think you're moving too fast. It just seems like there's something off about him. You might want to pray about this first. Did that bother you? Did you think she was a hater? Did you think he was a hater? If so, you probably gonna hate this brother, because he's going to be one that makes you acknowledge heaven before you make this decision. In all thy ways, acknowledge me. Prayer is gonna be like this brother's main hobby. He's gonna pray before he makes decisions, because he knows every choice is pregnant with the potential to give birth to a season. And when you're born, you look like your parents, but when you die, you look like your choices. And as a leader, he has learned, I gotta know God's voice in devotion so I can know God's voice in direction. I think we should pray about this one first. I'm not saying you don't want a godly man. I'm just challenging you. Is this something you really want because you want a king that will lead you to the King of Kings? Or is this something that you just rocked the title for so long that you're just rocking the title in this area too? Do you meet the expectations that you require? And when it comes to serving, this could be a problem too. Are you driven? Are you selfless? Or have you made a pallet in the graveyard of your comfort zone? Man, could you imagine living with somebody who constantly disturbs your comfort zone? Like, have you ever snapped at God or were upset at God because he's calling you to do something that you don't want to do? Now, God is perfect, but could you imagine an imperfect man adjusting the thermostat of the apartment of your comfort and making it hot? Godly men are pushers, and they're constantly going to push you to be everything that God has called you to be. And if you don't like being pushed, I don't know if you're gonna like this brother. And before you snap talking about I'm cool, I'm happy, I want you to really ask yourself, are you happy? Or are you comfortable? And you know what's crazy? Our view of love. Like, if you have a cultural view of love, you like cuddles, companionship, and fire conversations, no wonder you keep entertaining devils, because you could be compatible with a demon. But kingdom love? Oh, kingdom love stretches you. It's okay for you to fight for someone who loves you. It's a waste of time to fight for someone to love you. There's a difference. Jesus on the cross was the first PDA known to man. Public display of affection. He was showing us what king love looks like. It stretches you. He was stretched on the cross, and I think you have to ask yourself, am I okay with being stretched? Because if you're with a godly man, his love is gonna feel like stretching. It's not always gonna feel like cuddles. It's not always gonna feel like butterflies. It's not always gonna look like roses. Many times it's gonna look like pushing. And the last one I think is a big one. Would it annoy you to constantly and repetitively be told over and over to do something that you already know that you should do? Like, you know why God many times doesn't give us next instructions? It's because we haven't had now obedience. And could you imagine being with somebody who constantly reminds you what God said? Hey babe, when you gonna write that book? Hey babe, when you gonna write this song? Hey babe, when you gonna call your mom and apologize? Hey, when you gonna reach out to them? Hey, when you gonna step out on faith? Hey, when you gonna start that entrepreneurial pursuit? Hey, when are you gonna, because that's what God does. A lot of us are looking for God to talk next, and he's like, no, you didn't obey my last instruction. So until you obey my last instruction, I don't really have any new information. And a real godly man is gonna constantly remind you what God told you. And if that annoys you, I think a godly man might get on your nerves. Just something I want y'all to think about. Redefined TV, where redefining relationships righteously.